Hey guys, tonight we're venturing deep into the Persian desert, not for heat, but for cold. That's right. You're standing in a windless afternoon, the horizon shimmering like a skillet, and somewhere nearby, hidden beneath layers of sun-baked earth, is a chunk of ice. Real ice. Not the metaphorical cool kind, but the kind that could chill your tea, soothe your sunburn, or, say, preserve lamb stew for a few days. And you're about to learn how people who'd never even heard of air conditioning manage to do it. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive this without a decent hat and for water skins strapped to your donkey. But that's okay. You're not here to survive. You're here to fall asleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun is brutal. It presses down like a weight. And yet somehow you walk past a rounded clay dome rising from the dust like a half-buried moon. And inside, there is ice. You didn't imagine that chill on your wrist. A drop of condensation trails down from your sleeve to your elbow. Welcome to the world of the yak, literally. Ice pit. These ancient Persian structures were the perfect marriage of architecture and climate sorcery. And tonight, you get to wander through one. You pass the narrow threshold. The air smells of sun-baked mud and something colder, earth and snow, and a faint trace of rosewater. Your feet crunch over packed clay, and your shoulders brush the cool, inward curving wall. Light filters down from a small vent above, and that filtered sunbeam never quite touches the base. There, in the half-dark, is a shallow pool, dry now, but once filled with water in winter and transformed, overnight, into a sheet of solid ice. This wasn't just a lucky trick. It was designed, built by people who understood, intimately, how heat moved, how wind behaved, how night air whispered secrets that could freeze a puddle before dawn. You pause. The air inside is easily 15 degrees cooler than it was outside. Your breath feels heavier, like it wants to sleep too. Historians still argue whether the yak hole was a local invention or a borrowed one. Some say ancient Mesopotamians had similar cooling structures, while others point to Central Asian nomads with underground chambers. But the Persians took it to an art form. They didn't just make do. They turned ice into luxury. The dome above you isn't just pretty. Its shape minimizes solar exposure. Its thick mud brick walls, mixed with sand, goat hair, and a mysterious ash-based mortar that some modern chemists can't quite replicate, insulate like a thermos. Some of these walls were over 2 meters thick. That's more wall than some modern bank vaults. But what makes it even more impressive is what's underneath you. A cavity, sometimes 5 meters deep, carved straight into the earth. This was where the ice sat collected in the dead of winter, carried by men and mules from mountaintops dozens of miles away, or sometimes created on site during the coldest nights in shallow evaporation pools. Imagine hauling snow in baskets down from a mountain, knowing that every slushy mile cost you 10% of your payload. There's devotion. And then there's I might melt before I arrive devotion. The sun outside fades a bit. A stray breeze pushes through the doorway. You don't move. You just breathe. The silence of the yak hole is total, except for the occasional soft drip condensation finding its way down cracks, gathering in little puddles that feel like secrets. And perhaps most mind-boggling of all, the Persians did this for centuries. Long before electricity, before Freon, before insulated coolers and ice cube trays. They had systems. Communities timed their ice harvests with lunar calendars. They passed down wind calculation knowledge like family heirlooms. And they made it work. That ice wasn't just for survival. It was for celebration. Think chilled melon on the hottest day of the year. Think saffron sorbet served in a brass bowl, its surface sweating gently in your hand. You lean your head back against the curved wall and listen. The cool holds. The quiet deepens. And you begin to imagine how, in the heart of so much sun and stone, someone once whispered, "Would you like that cold?" The air thickens slightly as you step back into the light. A shimmer dances on the horizon. Somewhere, a donkey brays lazily. But above your head, a strange tower recesses a narrow, vertical tunnel with slats like open gills. This is not some leftover minaret or chimney. This is a badger, a wind catcher, and it's about to change how you think about air. You tilt your head. The tower is oddly elegant, a rectangle of mud brick with openings facing multiple directions. It's as if someone looked at the sun, the wind, and the walls of their home, and thought, what if I could trick all three at once? The badger doesn't just catch wind, it hunts it. When a breeze passes by, it's sucked into the tower, guided down a shaft, and funneled through the living spaces below. If there's no wind, not a problem. The tower creates airflow by temperature differences, coaxing hot air to rise and drawing cool air in its place. Some designs even incorporated clever water features at the base, shallow pools that cooled the air further through evaporation before it reached the room. It's basically the ancient Persian version of have you tried turning on the fan and putting a wet towel in front of it. You step into one of these homeschool, dim, and strangely serene. The air smells faintly of dust, dates, and something sweetly metallic. You run your hand along the clay walls and feel how the temperature barely shifts from room to room. It's like walking through a house that's quietly resisting the sun. Historians still debate whether badgers evolved independently or were adapted from Egyptian or Babylonian architectural elements. Some argue their origin dates back as early as 4,000 years ago. Others insist the fully developed form appeared under the Achaemenids. But no matter who claims invention rights, the Persians perfected it. Yazd alone has hundreds of badgers still standing, some so tall they hum when the desert wind gets playful. The irony, of course, is that they only work well in dry climates. You wouldn't want to try one in the swamps of Florida. But in Iran, perfection. You sit in the corner of this cool chamber, listening to the distant coo of doves and the rustle of wind overhead. Imagine living here in midsummer, your feet bare on a cool clay floor, your tea sweating gently in a brass cup, and the walls never quite letting the heat in. One traveler from the 1800s wrote in his journal that he stepped inside a badger-cooled house, expecting relief, and instead found himself reaching for a blanket. He called it the most bewildering contrast of temperature I've ever felt, without the assistance of witchcraft. But it wasn't magic. It was geometry, patience, and knowing your environment intimately. These weren't just featuresque, they were lifelines. You glance back up toward the wind catcher's slats. Light filters in, casting sharp golden rectangles on the floor. And then, as you focus, you feel it, a soft push of air, just enough to stir the hem of your robe. That's the whisper of ancient engineering, still breathing after all these centuries. In this world, airflow is an art. Shade is an asset. Water is a strategy. And sometimes, all of those converge in one architectural symphony. It's said that in more elaborate mansions, badgers were paired with underground cannons toes endless, hand-dug water tunnels that channeled mountain springs across hundreds of miles. The wind passed down through the tower, skimmed across the cool cannet water below, and emerged in the room like a polite, damp sigh. That, dear listener, is passive air conditioning. No wires, no humming units, just stone, shadow, and know-how. Some modern eco-architects have started copying these systems. There are luxury homes in Arizona and Saudi Arabia now that boast Persian-inspired wind towers, as if this were a chic new fad rather than a 2-0-year-old necessity. But hey, better late than never. You lean your shoulder against the wall, cool and patient like a sleeping cat. The wind catcher hums faintly above. You imagine someone, 500 years ago, sitting where you sit now, sipping from a copper bowl and fanning themselves gently, not for need but habit. Outside, the sand glows. But here, inside this womb of calm air and thick walls, the heat is a rumor you barely believe. And so, you sit a little longer. The wind comes, then pauses. The fan of the ages turns one more slow, silent breath. By now, your feet are used to the packed dust, your eyes to the warm glow of clay and sun. But next, you descend, down a narrow passage, carved carefully into the earth, each step shaded, dry, and cooler than the last. The air shifts, subtly, with a ghost of moisture. You duck your head, brush past a low lintel, and arrive inside a Yakul properthus, one still intact, untouched for decades, maybe longer. It's cavernous. You half whisper, expecting an echo, but the sound dies instantly, absorbed by the dense, curved walls. The silence here is a presence. You step slowly, soles whispering over packed silt, and look up. The domed ceiling rises like the inside of a great clay bell, narrowing to a small vent at the very top. It's from there that stale air escapes, a feature so perfectly calculated that even modern architects pause and blink in admiration. There's no smell of rot, no staleness, just a sense of waiting. The dome holds the cool like a prayer cupped in quiet hands. Beneath your feet is the pit, dry now, but once, it would have been filled with thick blocks of ice, stacked in layers, separated by straw or coarse mats. The walls, nearly 2 meters thick in places, insulated from desert extremes. Some ice stored here could last until late autumn, even through the flaming peak of July. Historians still debate how widespread domestic ice access really was. Was this a luxury reserved for the elite? Or did even modest townsfolk get a little summer chill now and then? But everyone agrees this wasn't an accident. The Persians knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't guessing. They were observing, waiting for just the right night to flood the shallow outdoor pools beside the Yakul rectangular basins just a few inches deep. There, under the wide winter sky, water would freeze overnight. By dawn, the ice was scraped up, packed, and lowered into the subterranean pit. You imagine that sound, the creak of wooden buckets, the scrape of ice against clay, men muttering, breath misting in the pre-dawn chill. A faint splash. The hush of straw lay gently on frozen surfaces. And those pools weren't just sitting in open space. Oh no. Tall walls were built beside the mangled walls that cast long shadows and protected the water from daytime sun. Think of it like ice farming, except your tractor is the moon and your irrigation system is pure geometry. The deeper you walk into this chamber, the more you feel its slow patience that went into its making. Every slope, every wall, every vent, every layer of that curious lime clay sand goat hair mortar designed to resist time, heat, and even rodents. There's a niche in the wall and alcove where records were kept. Recipes perhaps, or household logs noting which family got how much ice on which day. Some scholars have uncovered ceramic tablets with marks suggesting rationing systems. Was it fair? Was there squabbling over who got extra in a drought year? Almost certainly. And yet, there's something comfortingly domestic about it. You picture a woman ladling ice chips into a bowl of melon and syrup, a child racing in from the courtyard with sticky fingers, a father placing a cold cloth on his neck before an afternoon nap. All this, Possible because someone dared to carve a frozen cave beneath a desert town. One French traveler in the early 1700s described the yak hole as a miracle of silent industry. His words, scribbled in a journal now browning with age, still echoing faintly here as you sit on a cool stone ledge and feel the yak hole breathing around you. The strange thing is, the Persians never made a fuss. These weren't monuments. They weren't temples. No one built them for glory. They were practical, useful, humble but perfect. And like many perfect things, they were often taken for granted. You trail your hand along the wall. It's faintly cool, like porcelain that's been left untouched in a cabinet. Dust motes float down from the shaft above, spinning slowly in the slanted light. And in that moment, you think the desert isn't cruel. It's precise, demanding, yes. But if you listen, if you plan, if you learn to carve domes from mud and harvest winter into baskets, it will let you keep your ice. For a while, you close your eyes. The ground holds you. The dome hums with silence. The desert waits outside, like a lion on a leash. Outside again, the heat returns in waves pulsing, steady, like breath from a giant oven. You lift your arm and squint toward the horizon, where something white glimmers faintly against the brown crags of distant mountains. Snow, real snow, perched like a frosting layer on peaks so distant they almost seem part of another world. But once upon a time, they weren't symbols of inaccessibility, were lifelines. Because when the yak hole couldn't make enough ice on its own, the snow came to it. You imagine yourself now not as a sleepy visitor, but a snow caravaner, part of an ancient Persian team hauling winter down to the heart of summer. It's mid-February. You've wrapped yourself in thick wool. Your camel has opinions. Your boots are stiff with frost. And you're Joe Budley enough as to deliver ice to the desert. This was no small task. Men loaded baskets with tightly packed snow, often pre-dampened to compress better. The baskets were lined with straw, fig leaves, or sometimes animal skin to reduce melting. They moved mostly at night, climbing down treacherous switchbacks by moonlight, their shadows cast long across the rock. Historians still argue whether the snow hauling system was centralized, or more of a community scramble. Some believe regional lords controlled the traffic. Others suggest it was handled cooperatively, with set quotas per household. But one thing's clear, there was pride in the journey. You picture the noise, camels groaning, baskets creaking, bells clinking like quiet music over frozen paths. Some caravans were modest. Others were grand, stretching a dozen beasts long, like moving glaciers with hooves. They'd follow ancient paths etched into mountain passes, whispering to one another in a dialect lost to time. And all the while, the sun chased them, melting a little profit with every passing mile. But they had tricks. Caravans moved mostly before sunrise or after dusk. Some dug roadside snow pits, shaded with branches, to rest their loads midday. Others sealed snow in clay jars, buried them in cold sand during the hottest stretch, and picked them up again the next night. It was part transport, part survival puzzle. And somehow, many made it. They'd arrive at towns like Kerman, Shiraz, or Yazd in the pre-dawn hush, their shoulders sore, their faces wine-burned, but their baskets still frosted inside. There, the snow would be unpacked, repacked into the yak hole, or sometimes used immediately for festivals, weddings, or religious rituals. Imagine the prestige of serving chilled drinks in a town where no fountain dared bubble after noon. In some seasons, children would race out to meet the snow caravans, squealing with delight as the first flake dusted their hands. The ice itself became mythic soft, clean, sacred, and no one wasted it. Even the slush had purpose. Gardeners used it to mist citrus groves at dawn, hoping to give lemons that extra tenderness. Some healers prescribed it mixed with pomegranate juice for cooling fevers. In rare cases, kings ordered entire platforms built from snow for royal celebrations' feller stages that melted under dancers' feet by sunset. You stand now at one of those ancient drop-offs at a wide stone basin on the edge of a market square. It's empty, just dust and echoes now, but you imagine it bustling, men shouting, animals stamping, a woman inspecting the clarity of a snowball like a jeweler appraising a gem. There's an open debate among historians about how much snow each caravan really delivered. Was it enough for dozens of families? Hundreds? Or just as symbolic gestures for the elite, tales for everyone else? Whatever the truth, the cultural memory of it lingers, like the aftertaste of something cold on a dry tongue. You touch the rim of the stone basin. It's sun-warmed now, rough beneath your fingers, but you picture it glistening, wet and icy, on a morning centuries ago. And you think, to carry snow to the desert is either madness or genius. Possibly both. Now your fingers trail along the thick outer wall of a nearby structure, its surface cracked slightly with age, but still standing proud. It's bulbous, domed, and somehow feels both primitive and futuristic. Up close, the detail reveals itself, layer upon layer of sun-dried mud brick. But not just any mud brick. This was no hasty slap of clay and water. This was a recipe perfected over centuries. You press your palm against it. It's warm, but only just. The sun has been glaring down for hours, yet the wall remains oddly indifferent, as if it's grown bored of being heated. That's the first hint that what you're touching is, architecturally speaking, miraculous. The mix they used was a peculiar blend of sand, clay, ash, goat hair, and the sometimes crushed pottery. Known in some records as sarouge, it repelled water and shrugged off temperature swings with stubborn efficiency. It expanded slightly in heat, contracted in cold, and sealed itself tighter over time. Some modern researchers have tried to recreate it in laboratories, only to find that the exact texture and resilience remain elusive. You chuckle softly to yourself goat hair and ash, the original insulation foam. Historians agree this stuff was tough. It kept ice frozen through the kind of summers that fried figs right on the vine. The walls of the yak hole were often to meters thick at the base, tapering slightly toward the top, and always demed because domes didn't just look nice. They minimized surface area exposed to direct sun, and the interior curvature helped air circulate gently, keeping the cool locked in. And then there's the color light beige or off-white. Not just for aesthetics. That pale surface reflected sunlight instead of absorbing it. Like a long, patient mirror turning the sun's fury into a slow shrug. You imagine the builders now, sweating, bent over frames of bundled reeds, smoothing layer after layer of plaster with their hands. Not a single straight edge in sight. Just curves, arches, and slopes, all built to out with the sun. One story apocryphal, but too good to ignore, tells of a master builder who refused payment until he could return in midsummer, open the dome, and show the prince a chunk of ice still intact. When the day arrived, the prince allegedly fainted from astonishment or heat stroke. The records are unclear. The truth is, these ice houses weren't just functional. They were elegant. Even today, they look almost alien, like fossilized spaceships half buried in desert sand. There's something comforting about that image, humans reaching up to the stars, while learning how to preserve the cold. Not every house had its own yak hole, of course. Most were shared community structures, often maintained by guilds or families who passed down their knowledge like sacred recipes. Entry was restricted. Ice was rationed. In lean years, it was guarded with the kind of care usually reserved for royal treasures. Imagine arguing over whose turn it was to chisel off a chunk of frost. Tempers flared. Ice melted. Arguments sizzled. Some records even describe a clever lock system, with a narrow wooden lid over the ice pit and a weighted pulley that could only be operated with 2 people. A trust-based system unless your cousin knew how to pick knots. But as you stand here now, all is calm. A soft wind rises. Dust dances along the outer rim of the dome. The sky is beginning to shift timbre, sliding into lilac, shadows stretching like sleepy cats across the desert floor. And you realize that nothing here is accidental. Every curve has meaning. Every material has memory. Even the roughness of the outer wall is by design meant to catch early morning dew, allowing droplets to trickle slowly downward and cool the structure as they evaporate. It's subtle. It's genius. It's basically the desert equivalent of someone putting their entire personality into building a perfect lunchbox. So you sit, for a moment, back against the wall, staring up at the slope of dome and sky. There's no noise but your own breath, and maybe the faintest flutter of air through a nearby wind catcher. And you think, if this is how people face the sun with clay, shadow, and goat hair, maybe we've been overthinking air conditioning all along. You shift your weight slightly and stretch your legs, dust brushing your ankles, as the light begins to settle into that golden arc-glazive kind that softens the world and makes even cracked walls glow like warm bread crust. Now you're wandering toward the shaded courtyard of a grander home, a merchant's estate perhaps, where summer luxuries once awaited under carved wooden eaves. Because ice wasn't just about survival, it was about prestige. You enter slowly, your eyes adjusting to the filtered light through latticework and climbing vines. A wide bowl sits on a stone table, filled with slices of chilled melon and plums, glistening like jewels. A servant pours a slow stream of rosewater over the fruit, and you can almost hear the sizzle of cold against heat. This is status. In a time and place where most people labored to stay alive in 45°C heat, the ability to hand someone a frozen treat was nothing short of a social power move. Elite families in cities like Shiraz or Isfahan treated ice as delicacy, spectacle, and sometimes performance. Imagine entering a courtyard to find not just melon, but sherbet sweet, spiced drinks infused with basil seeds, lemon, saffron, or sour cherry served cold, with slivers of snow twinkling in brass cups. The drink cools your fingertips. Condensation trickles lazily. You sip, and it tastes like memory. Historians agree that sherbet was as central to Persian hospitality as tea is today. But when served iced, it was a subtle flex. Oh, this old cup of snow-laced pomegranate syrup. Just something we had lying around. And don't even get started on faluda. You walk slowly into a back kitchen where a woman stirs a bowl filled with delicate rice noodles, frozen rose water, and a dash of lime juice. The mixture crunches faintly as she folds it gently, like snow caught between dreams. This was no casual dessert. This was engineering meets art. Some scholars believe faluda is the oldest recorded frozen dessert in the world, predating European sorbet by several centuries. Of course, historians still debate that claim. Some argue the Chinese had similar dishes earlier, while others point to Mediterranean iced fruit concoctions. But in Persia, faluda wasn't just food. It was ritual. You imagine a wedding banquet, 100 guests reclining on silk cushions, music floating through cypress branches, and silver trays emerging with faluda arranged like soft snowdrifts, flecked with slivers of pistachio. For many, it would be the first and last time in the year they tasted anything frozen. And still, even among all this glamour, people used ice practically too. A grandmother might cool compresses for her grandson's fever. A young wife could soak linens in chilled water and drape them over windows to turn a breezeway into a makeshift ice tunnel. Some aristocrats even kept small insulated boxes filled with snow by their bedsides, just to feel a cool cloth on their forehead as they drifted off. The blending of indulgence and practicality was part of the genius. Ice wasn't wasted. It was revered. Even the meltwater from a snow block could be stored and used for flavoring, bathing, or quiet medicinal rituals. You now sit in the corner of the courtyard, the sun low enough that the shade is complete, the air beginning to feel like breath again rather than blast. A copper tray is placed near you. There's a small bowl of faluda, slightly softened, tiny steamless wisps rising from the ice. You take a spoonful. It tastes like rose petals and memory foam. Somewhere nearby, laughter-rise children playing. Maybe someone splashing from a shallow pool. These courtyards were often built around small water basins, shaded by grapevines and pomegranate trees. Not just for beauty, but to chill the space. The water cooled the air, the vines provided cover, and the shadows did the rest. It's subtle, it's elegant, and it's working. You close your eyes, not to sleep yet, but just to feel how cold can become luxury, how snow can become memory, and how a few clever humans once made the sun their servant with nothing but mud, math, and a quiet bowl of frozen noodles. You rise slowly from the shaded courtyard, brushing your palms against your robe. The sun has dipped lower now, and the light slants across the narrow alleyways like spilled honey. It's quieter than before. You hear only a gentle cooing of pigeons from a rooftop, and somewhere far off, the clink of metal on stone. You're headed now into the older part of town where people didn't just rely on yakals for relief, but invented all sorts of clever tricks to outwit the heat in everyday life. Because in this world, shade is strategy. You turn into a covered walkway, what locals once called a sabata, kind of architectural umbrella stretched between homes. It shades the street, yes, but also creates a microclimate. You feel the air change as you pass beneath it. Cooler, less hostile. It's like slipping into a whisper. In ancient Persian towns, entire neighborhoods were designed around shade planning. Homes were built close together, their upper stories often leaning slightly toward each other like old friends in secret conversation. This created narrow corridors of darkness, especially during the cruelest hours of the afternoon. Historians call this passive thermal design. You might call it a very smart way not to melt. Families hung wet reed mats over doorways. They'd soak them in the morning, then let the desert air pass through during the day. The result: a cool breeze with a faint scent of water and grass, drifting through the entryway like a sigh of relief. You enter a modest home now, simple but brilliant in its planning. The walls are thick, the windows small and placed high. The floors are of polished stone, sometimes splashed with water during peak heat to cool the air further. And from the ceiling hangs a curious item, a fan made from palm fronds, attached to a rope and pulley system. Not electric, not automatic, just a quiet innovation. A family member would sit nearby, tugging the rope at steady intervals up, down, up, down. The air stirs. The room breathes. In wealthier homes, servants might take shifts manning these fans while the elders rested. In others, the youngest child would do the honors, which may explain why some older Persian lullabies have lyrics like, "Little wine-bringer, let father sleep." You pass into another courtyard where vines stretch over wooden trellises, their leaves rustling gently. Grapevine tunnels were a favorite summer refuge, green canopies draped over stone paths, where one could walk barefoot even at noon. The fruit shaded the space, while the leaves exhaled moisture into the air. Not bad for a plant that also gave you snacks. And then there's the curious case of rooftop napping. On many nights, entire families would climb to the flat roofs of their homes to sleep. Mattresses were laid out early, and children helped carry up pillows, blankets, even lanterns. By midnight, the rooftops were dotted with bodies, like a second village sleeping beneath the stars. The clay roofs radiated away their heat into the open sky, and breezes flowed freely above the city walls. You settle into one of those rooftops now just for a moment. The air is dry but soft, like a page turned slowly. Someone nearby is lighting sandalwood incense, believed to cool the blood. A grandmother is whispering old stories to lull her grandchild, her voice like water over stone. Historians still argue about how effective these traditional methods really were. Were they enough to truly counter the 45-degree days? Or just partial relief, helping people survive rather than thrive? The truth likely lives somewhere between. They didn't eliminate the heat, but they gave people the tools to endure it with dignity, ingenuity, and the occasional chilled melon. Some towns even had community cooling hours, where people gathered under arcades or at the mosque courtyard, fanning themselves slowly, sipping water from clay jugs, and letting the sun pass overhead like a tiger stalking its prey. They knew better than to resist it. They outlasted it. And through it all, there was ice. Not always within reach, but always within memory. The taste of it, the feel, the story of how it was made and kept it lingered like a family heirloom. As the day tilts toward evening, you feel the air change again. Lighter now, less aggressive. You descend from the rooftop slowly, like a cat climbing down from a windowsill, and back into the shaded maze of streets that made up these towns built not just to house people, but to protect them from the fury of their own geography. And you think, maybe comfort isn't about removing discomfort entirely. Maybe it's about learning how to walk through it with quiet brilliance, and a slightly damp curtain swaying in the breeze. You wander now through a nearly empty plaza, your footsteps muted by the fine dust underfoot. Ahead stands a building that looks simple at first glance to walls. Arched entrance, a pair of slender windows high up on either side. But as you step closer, you begin to notice the precision in every line. This isn't just a home or a storehouse. This is a lesson in how to make geometry your climate ally. You enter. The space is cool and most startlingly so, and you realize you've stepped into a structure designed with solar angles in mind. In ancient Persia, architects were obsessed with the trajectory of sunlight, like a modern person might obsess over Wi-Fi signal strength. They charted the path of the sun across every season and built accordingly. Everything in this room is here because of an angle. The windows are placed deliberately high and face north, where the light is soft and indirect. The south-facing walls, thick, mostly windowless, and sometimes coated with lime wash to reflect heat. Even the doorways are offset and placed directly opposite each other, but staggered so no beam of sun could shoot straight through and heat the place like an oven. Historians still marvel at how carefully these measurements were made, often with little more than string, shadow, and a patient eye. Some believe ancient Persian builders used simple sundials and alignment charts to find optimal placements. Others argue that oral tradition carried much of this knowledge, passed down through guilds of master masons, each with their own secrets. You turn into a smaller chamber what seems to be a summer room, or tabastunk. It's lower than the main space, dug slightly into the earth. The walls here are even thicker, and the floor is lined with a shallow channel once fed by a small underground canal. These spaces were designed not only for comfort, but for rest afternoon siestas, cooling fevers, or just escaping the world for a bit. A small niche in the wall holds a jug of water. The jug is clay, porous, and slightly damp on the outside. As the water inside slowly evaporates to the surface, it cools what remains an ancient technique still used in many rural areas. You pick it up, feel the beads of sweat on its surface, and take a sip. It's cool, earthy, satisfying. And then there's the ceiling. You look up to see a mucornasa decorative vaulting design made of layered, honeycomb-like structures. Beautiful, yes, but also functional. These forms trap hot air at the top and encourage cooler air to circulate near the floor. They create shade even within shade. Architecture not just for aesthetics, but for airflow. You pause beside a window slit. A breeze catches your sleeve, and you glance out to see the sun glinting off the polished surface of a dome in the distance. It's a public bathhouse, another space where geometry and cooling intersected. Some of these were designed with sun-dampening skylights, heated and cooled chambers, and water reservoirs placed strategically to moderate air temperature. A kind of communal refrigerator disguised as a spa. You step back, slowly tracing the carved plaster on the wall with your fingertip. Every groove here was placed not just for decoration, but to minimize glare, reflect light gently, and keep your ice and your body calm. Historians sometimes downplay these features as vernacular architecture, but there's nothing casual about it. This was science disguised as style, function posing as grace. Outside, you begin to walk again. You pass homes with bent entrance doorways that don't open directly into the house, but curve around a short hallway. This served two purposes: privacy, and a kind of airlock that stopped hot gusts from rushing straight in. Just another example of everyday genius. You pause beneath a small arbor. A man passes by with a crate of figs, nods politely. His shirt is damp with sweat, but his face is calm. He's lived in this climate his whole life. He doesn't fear the sun. He outsmarts it. There's a term in Persian, kadi eremidanto, rest within oneself, to find coolness and calm. You're starting to understand it. It's not just about ice or shadow. It's about harmony, stillness, accepting the heat but refusing to let it own you. And as the sun leans westward, stretching long fingers of gold across the alley, you tuck into another shaded doorway. You lean against the wall, cool, quiet, deliberate, and think. The sun may reign over the desert, but in these angled walls, these clever vents, and these ancient courtyards, the people reign too. You're walking again, this time following a dusty road just outside the village. The path winds gently between clumps of scrub brush, the air hazy with sun and distant goat bells. Then, rising on the horizon like a sleeping beast, you see it, a caravan of camels, lurching in slow, deliberate rhythm, their shadows long and wobbly on the sand. These aren't spice traders or silk merchants. These are ice haulers, and you've arrived at the annual Great Ice Race. Not a race in the way you'd expect. No banners, no crowds cheering. Just a silent contest between teams of men and beasts trying to deliver snow from distant peaks to yak halls before it melts into oblivion. You find yourself walking alongside them, the camel next to you snorting with mild indignation as it adjusts the weight of its cargo. Its saddlebags are stuffed not with grain or gimps but with straw-insulated cubes of ice, tightly wrapped in linen. Each team has its own method. One group travels in short bursts, resting in natural caves during the midday heat. Another uses larger animals to carry heavier loads, but risks moving slower. There are rumors of a family that built secret halfway snow pits, shaded by rock overhangs, to store extra ice between legs of the journey. That's the thing about the ice race. Irion's got a theory. Everyone wants to win, not for money, but for honor. Historians still argue about whether this race was official or a more informal tradition. Some say there were rewards offered by local governors for the fastest or most efficient caravan. Others believe it was rooted more in bragging rights, a ritual that brought communities together and gave boys a reason to become men. Whatever the case, it mattered. Ice was precious, and whoever delivered the most, the coldest, the cleanest, that name would be spoken with respect well into winter. You stop at a weighing station, a small stone hut near a grove of tamarisk trees. Inside, scribes sit with tablets, scales, and clay tokens. As each caravan arrives, its goods are inspected. Ice is measured not just by weight, but by clarity and density. Pure mountain ice, untouched by hands, gets higher value. Slushy, half-melted chunks. Still useful but hardly prizeworthy. You lean over to observe a scribe examining a block. He taps it gently with a stick, holds it to the light, then nods. A token is handed over. The caravan leader bows slightly. Business done. Further down the road, you hear murmurs of sabotage. One group claims their ice was tampered with overnight baskets found slightly ajar. The straw padding damp when it shouldn't be. Was it a rival? A careless helper? Or just the brutal heat playing tricks? There are tales, too, of heroic deliveries. Of men running the final mile on foot, burdened with melting loads after camels collapsed. Of a single surviving block of ice making it to a wedding, where it cooled the bride's wine and made her veil flutter with joy. Not all journeys end in triumph. Some caravans arrive too late, their loads little more than chilled water. The Yakul overseer sighs, shakes his head, and the men trudge off in silence, their boots squishing faintly. But even failure has dignity here. They tried. They joined the dance between mountain and desert, and for a few frozen moments, they held winter in their hands. You take a seat on a rock and close your eyes, letting the sun touch your face. In the distance, more camel bells chime soft, solemn, musical. A boy runs past, holding up a shallow bowl filled with slush. He's smiling, chasing his own shadow. Perhaps he doesn't care that his ice is melting. For him, it's magic enough that it made it here at all. You begin to understand something deeper now. The Great Ice Race was never really about speed. It was about connection between villages, between families, between high mountain snows and scorched valley floors. Every flake carried in those baskets was part of a story of effort, patience, resilience, and an unspoken belief that cold, too, could be cultivated with enough will. The road quiets again. Dust settles. You rise, your clothes a little damp from leaning against a shaded wall, and you follow the last of the caravans toward town, thinking of the journey they've made, and the quiet miracle of keeping cold alive. You follow the last few camels into town as the sun starts to sink low, bleeding orange into the horizon like saffron in warm milk. The air is still dry, but gentler now, and the scent of cooked rice and rosewater begins to waft from open courtyards. You're headed not toward a palace or a yakul this time, but to a small shop, tucked behind a row of market stalls. A bell rings as you enter, and there it is, a bowl of faluda, sweating faintly in the evening air. You sit on a low bench, the cushion worn and sun-faded. The shopkeeper smiles with the knowing look of someone who knows what you're really here for. Not just dessert but relief. Faluda isn't just the world's oldest frozen dessert, it's a moment of cool joy in a hot world. You scoop into the bowl. The noodles thin, translucent, made from rice starch glide softly through a semi-frozen slush of rosewater, sugar, and a squeeze of lime. It's crunchy and smooth, sweet and tart, familiar and new all at once. A handful of crushed pistachios on top, just for flourish. This dish dates back centuries. Persian records mention it as early as 400 BCE, and some scholars believe it was served at royal banquets during the Achaemenid era. Others argue it evolved later, during the Safavid period, when saffron, citrus, and syrups became everyday luxury for those who could afford it. But whoever first dreamed it up, their legacy is alive and well in your bowl. You look around the shop. A stone basin in the corner still has remnants of the day's ice, likely chipped from a nearby communal yakul. The interior is lined with cold storing clay, and a narrow pipe leads underground, perhaps once connected to a cannet or holding pool. This place wasn't built yesterday. It was designed for perishables, patience, and poetry. You overhear a soft conversation between two elderly men at the next table, arguingly. politely about which region makes the best faluda. Shiraz is the traditional favorite, they say, but Yazd has a more refined hand. You smile. Historians still debate that. 2. One 19th century traveler swore he had faluda in Tabriz that was better than any sorbet in Paris. But perhaps the location isn't what matters, it's the timing. The experience. The hush that settles when the first spoonful touches your tongue. In some wealthier households, ice cream wars became a seasonal affair. Cooks competed to make the most inventive frozen delights, rose and saffron ices, snowballs dusted with date sugar, even chilled fig cream stored in tight ceramic jars. There's a rumor that one aristocrat once served frozen pomegranate pearls to his guests, each one suspended in jelly like a ruby trapped in glass. These weren't just desserts. They were social events, status symbols, a way to say, look what we can preserve, what we can shape, what we can afford to lose to melting. Of course, this obsession with cold indulgence had its tensions. There are records of merchants bribing Yakul guards for early access to fresh snow. Some local judges even had to intervene when arguments over ice distribution threatened to boil over. Literally and metaphorically. You sip slowly from a clay cup of Sharbeti Ablimust lemon syrup, fragrant with basil seeds. The seeds have swollen into translucent bubbles, floating like jellyfish in a cold sea. You swirl the drink. It murmurs softly, a gentle clink against the side of the cup, like wind chimes underwater. Outside, the town buzzes faintly. Children chase each other with palm leaf fans. Mothers hang linens dipped in cool well water. And a group of musicians sets up in a nearby garden pavilion. A flute begins to ply a low, wandering tune that wins its way through the alleys like mist. It's not meant to stir the blood. It's meant to quiet it. You finish your faludas and lean back, hand resting on the bench, the chill of the bowl still tingling your fingertips. The shopkeeper offers you a damp cloth scented with mint and sandalwood. You press it gently to your neck, and the feeling is instant, like breathing in from a well that remembers winter. And here, in this tiny Shopert ice house, part dessert Shrinu understands something unspoken, cold, when earned in heat, tastes like victory. Not loud, not triumphant but quiet, lasting. A kind of stillness you carry with you long after the dessert is gone. You step back out into the evening light, your footsteps slow, a little heavy now from the sweetness of the faluda and the hum of that flute, still echoing in your ears. The breeze picks up ever so slightly, tugging at the edge of your sleeve as you wander deeper into a part of the city few tourists ever see, an older neighborhood where the homes cluster like warm hands around a secret. You're in Yazd now, or at least a place like it. One of the coolest cities in the Persian Empire, not just figuratively. This city was designed for survival, for serenity, for summer days that would break lesser towns apart. And its defenses, not walls or towers, but air tunnels, earth-smart streets, and a calm, calculated intimacy with wind. You turn into a narrow alley barely shoulder width. The walls rise high, made of packed mud brick, their colors echoing the sand, the sky, the years. Above, small wooden beams stretch across the alley at intervals. They look decorative, but their practical fee break up airflow, catching wind like combs catching hair, slowing it down, letting it cool. This part of town is filled with wind towers, or badgers. You've seen a few already, but here they multiply graceful, rising from rooftops like sentinels. They vary in shape, some rectangular, others octagonal, some slender, others squat. Each is tuned, quite literally, to the local wind. Some face north only, others catch east and west. Some feed air into underground chambers where it flows over damp clay jars before entering the rooms. Above, you peek into a halcyon of the older ones, its door open, a pot of rice steaming just inside. The air inside is noticeably cooler. Not because someone left the fridge open, but because the house breathes. There's a cannet, likely, running beneath an ancient underground canal carrying mountain water. Shallow but steady, flowing silently for kilometers. The badger pulls air downward, where it cools as it glides across the cannet water, then rises gently into the living space. It's a natural air conditioner, one without plugs, without humming, just silence and function. Historians believe that by the 14th century, Yazd had perfected this combination: wind tower above, water tunnel below, thick adobe walls all around. Together, they created homes that stayed between 2025 C, even when outside temperatures soared past 40 C. That's not just good architecture. That's civilizational composure. You wander through the Liberi Khan Bazaar, now mostly closed for the night, though a few stalls remain open, candles flickering beside ceramic water jugs, baskets of dried figs, and jars of pickled garlic resting beside bricks of rock salt. You pause by a bench and sit for a moment, listening to the faint rustle of cloth as someone adjusts a reed mat overhead. To your left, a small public drinking fountain, built into a wall. Above it, a line of poetry carved into stone. He who drinks water remembers its digger. The water is cold. You take a sip. It tastes like stone, shadow, and patience. Yazd's narrow streets curve odd-line ever quite straight. This wasn't a mistake. The angles prevent wind from rushing headlong through and heating the homes. They guide the breeze instead, turn it into a gentle swirl. The roads, the walls, even the open drains, each feature was tuned like part of a musical instrument. You pass another home where someone has laid sheets on the rooftop, preparing for the nightly family migration to sleep under stars. You imagine them all lying there and are from no father snoring faintly, a child turning in her blanket, someone whispering a verse from Hafiz before drifting off. The moon climbs quietly above them. The wind tower sighs. And in the middle of all this gold, not biting or bracing, but gentle, the kind of cold that isn't temperature alone, but shelter, cleverness, resistance made graceful. As you rise and continue walking, your hand brushes the rough adobe wall beside you. You think, this is what cooling looked like before machines. Not imposed, but invited. Coaxed from earth and air, shaped into comfort through centuries of whispered experiments and sleepless summer nights. And in Yazd, the cool still lives not in museums, but in walls that remember the wind. You leave the city walls behind now, your path drifting out toward the dry, golden scrubland where trade once thrived and caravans came and went like clockwork. Ahead, shimmering under the dusk light, you spot a rest station, low stone walls, a cluster of palms, and a few shaded sheds built long ago for travelers, traders, and camel drivers. Because today's focus isn't palaces or yak house, it's the unsung ice couriers of the Persian world, the ones who didn't build domes or engineer towers, but who made sure the ice arrived. You step onto the cracked stone patio of the post station. The wood of the gate long faded to a smooth, silvery gray. Inside, a small stable hums with quiet life. A man waves lazily from under the eaves, seated beside a camel that looks deeply unimpressed by your presence. Its neck arches slowly as it eyes you, chewing with the detached air of someone who's seen things, including, probably, 100 deliveries of half-melted snow. Ice was heavy. Ice was fragile. Ice made camels grumpy. But somehow, the Persians managed it. You watch as a helper unstraps an old saddle basket, carefully wrapped in cloth and bound with layers of straw. Inside is a clay jar, narrow and deep, designed to hold a core of compressed snow or ice cubes. It's still cool inside, cool enough to feel it on your palm. You imagine the journey this load made, perhaps 50 kilometers, across open plain, through thorns, dust storms, and the endless yawn of sun. Historians say that camel teams were the true arteries of summer cool. Without them, even the best jackals would have run empty. Snow was harvested at high-altitudous Mount Alvand, the Zagros peaks, even the edges of Damavandland packed into baskets at dawn. Then came the camel drivers, often working in groups of 3 or 4, leading animals with names like Ashab, Noreen, or curiously recorded in one traveler's log Prince Frownypants. Their task: don't let the cold die before it arrives. They moved fast by desert standards. Night marches were common. Daytime was for shade and rest. Some groups used canvas slings suspended from the camel's back, allowing the ice to swing freely and avoid too much friction. Others buried wet woolen cloths around the cargo, knowing that evaporation itself could act as a defense. A few even hired scouts to ride ahead and test the trail for recent sand movement or bandit trouble. Yes, this theft was real. We'll get to that soon. And camels, well, they weren't known for their patience. Many didn't like the extra weight. Some records describe camels refusing to kneel for loading if they heard the sound of crunching snow. Others would stomp or spit if the water trickled from their load and hit their flanks. One poem from the 17th century simply reads, "Your breath is hot, your feet stubborn, but still without you, our sherbet is sorrow." You step behind the rest station, where a covered trench runs beneath the shadia place to lower fresh deliveries into the ground, for safekeeping until a cart from town could pick them up. A clay jar sits there now, half buried, its lid sealed with linen and beeswax. These jars weren't just containers. They were engineered cool pockets, shaped to narrow at the neck and retain cold even as the world outside sweltered. There's a stillness here, a respect. You get the sense that even in their dusty exhaustion, the men who handled these loads knew the weight of their work. They weren't just moving perishables. They were delivering a miracle. Scholars still debate how much ice actually survived these trips. Some suggest as much as 40% melted along the way. Others claim elite couriers could preserve up to 80% by timing their routes with rare desert breezes. Regardless of the numbers, one thing was clear: the arrival of a fresh block was cause for celebration. In homes, in marketplaces, in the weary, relieved eyes of a mother who could place a cool cloth on her child's forehead that night. You stand by the gate now, watching a camel kneel slowly, obedient at last, as another helper adjusts the straps. The sun has nearly vanished behind the hills. The world turns silver blue. Someone nearby pours water into a trough, and you hear the soft glup-glup of clay echoing coolness. And in that sound, in the worn leather of saddles, in the long shadows cast by animals bred for this very journey, you feel the heartbeat of a system so simple, so stubborn, and so graceful that it could carry ice across fire. By dawn, you're walking again, this time toward the fringes of the empire, toward what was once a bustling village, but is now little more than a memory baked into brick. The buildings rise low and crumbling in the morning haze, silhouettes of old commerce and community blurred by wind-blown dust and time. But even here, in this forgotten corner, something remains: the distinct, rounded curve of a yak hole, half buried in sand and shadow. You approach slowly. The dome is cracked, yes, and time has chewed away at the lower edges, but it stands. And more than that, it cools. Step by step, as you get closer, you notice the change. The temperature shifts, subtly but undeniably. A ghost chill lingers around the base of the dome, even though the desert's breath is already warming the air. Ruins like these are scattered across Iranzaland, sleeping domes tucked into hillsides or rising out of empty courtyards. Some are barely recognizable, others preserved with surprising care. But all of them tell the same quiet story. Once, people here harvested cold like a crop, and built vessels to preserve it. You push through a gap in the wall. It's a grand archway, now just crumbled edge sand. Step inside, The floor has partially collapsed, revealing the ice pit below, a dark void that smells faintly of earth and lichen. It hasn't held snow in decades, maybe longer, but you can imagine it, men lowering blocks with ropes, straw rustling softly, someone shouting over the rim. Left side. Lower it gently. The acoustics are strange. Every sound here feels cushioned, as though the walls are still doing their job absorbing heat, dulling echoes, holding calm. You whisper something just to hear it vanish. The walls don't reply, but they remember. There's a carved stone tablet near the entrance. The script is faded, but one phrase stands out. Still legible. Let the sun rage, you have made peace with the cold. Whether that was poetry or just good marketing, you can't be sure. But it fits. You settle on a chunk of broken plaster and trace the outline of the interior dome with your eyes. The same mathematical precision holds symmetry and curve, thickness in walls. A ventilation shaft still open to the sky. A bird flits across the top. Dust floats down like snow that forgot it wasn't winter. Some historians argue whether structures like these were ever truly abandoned. Perhaps the village relocated. Perhaps the water table changed. Or maybe just modern refrigeration made them feel obsolete. But here's the thing, the dome still cools. With no power. With no upkeep. With just the wind and its own brilliant design. You remember hearing that in some towns, even after electricity arrived, people still used yackles for certain tasks. Cooling fruit. Curing meats. Storing medicine. One story tells of a midwife who kept her herbs inside an old yackle dome because she believed no evil spirit can climb into a room that still breathes the cold. You smile at that. Outside, a group of goats clamber over a fallen wall, their hooves clicking against ancient clay. A boy whistles nearby, hurting them with sleepy eyes. He doesn't glance your way. To him, the yackle is part of the landscape, no different from a hill or tree. Not sacred, not strange, just there. But you know better. You've been inside. You've felt the difference. The yackle doesn't just sit in the land. It listens to it. You walk around the back of the structure and find the evaporation pool dry, now filled with cracked weeds and a single thorn bush curling stubbornly upward. Still, the trench lines remain. You can trace where the water once pooled, where ice once formed on frigid nights, and where snow was once gently packed into jars, carried down into the dark by men who knew they were practicing something rare and oddly holy. The ruins around you begin to glow as the sun clears the hills. The walls radiate gold. The air warms, and yet the dome does not. It holds its ground, its coolness, its stillness. And for just a moment, you're not standing in a ruin. You're standing in a monument to Memoria Place, where geometry meets endurance, where silence holds shape, and where a people long gone still whisper through architecture, saying, even here, in the dry and forgotten, we made a place for winter. You follow a winding footpath back toward the inhabited parts of town where satellite dishes perch awkwardly on mud brick roofs, and the call to prayer echoes over electric wires. But your eyes are drawn to something quieter, subtler, and entirely human. A group of people gathered beneath a trellis, sipping drinks, chatting gently, and fanning themselves in rhythmic, practiced motions. This is your next chapter, gender, etiquette, and cooling customs. Because in ancient Persia, just like in most societies, who got to cool down and how was shaped by more than just the sun. You settle on a woven mat near the group, watching without intruding. Two women dressed in light cotton robes sit side by side, their faces shaded by translucent veils. They use small hand fans made of palm and silk, waving them in delicate, almost ceremonial movements. Each flick is timed, intentional, elegant, not to cool dramatically, but to maintain dignity under pressure. Their conversation continues unbothered by the heat, their posture serene. No sweat stains, no fanning panic, just rhythm, grace, and perhaps a little performance. In more affluent homes, these fans were once elaborately embroidered, sometimes scented with rose or mint, and occasionally dipped in cold water before use. In public, especially for women of higher status, there were unspoken codes. Never fan yourself too quickly, it suggested weakness. Never wave a fan in someone else's direction unless they were a guest. And never complain aloud about the heat, a trait considered deeply inelegant. Meanwhile, the men nearby had their own ritual, sitting cross-legged around a clay cistern, occasionally splashing their faces and arms with water scooped by a small ladle. Some mutter about the harvest. Others play a slow game of backgammon. One man lifts a hand-cranked Mystera leather pouch with holes punched in it, which releases a gentle spray when squeezed. He uses it sparingly, like one might apply cologne. Another clutches a chilled cloth against the back of his neck, the very image of quiet triumph. Historians suggest that while both men and women used cooling tools, access and expectations were often gendered. Women inside the home could arrange entire rooms for coolness, changing wet linens, controlling light, managing the water jugs. Men, outside, had to improvise or rely on communal comforts. In some noble homes, women even had private wind catchers installed above their summer quarters, where airflow was channeled from separate towers to avoid mixing with the men's spaces. Children, as always, ran between these worlds. Little girls in light tunics carried tiny bowls of crushed ice, delivering them like treasures to elders reclining in shaded corners. Boys carried fans on sticks or toy water sprayers carved from gourd and string. In some families, there was a designated cooling child during afternoon, usually the youngest, tasked with waving a fan or wetting cloths while parents napped. There are lullabies, still sung today, that include lines like, "Little breeze, little hands, bring father dreams from icy lands." Class played a role, too. In homes with multiple courtyards, each level of status had its own summer retreat. The grandest courtyard, with the best ventilation and deepest cannet pool, belonged to the head of the household. Servants, naturally, cooled themselves in narrow shaded alleys or beside clay pots of evaporating water, near the kitchen's back wall. Yet even there, people found ways to make the heat poetic. A rag dipped in snowmelt could become a love token. A whispered offer of sherbet was also a gesture of reconciliation. One traveler's diary from the 17th century describes a scene where an elderly woman, seated in a silk-draped alcove, offered him a chilled drink on a tray cooled by a single snow pebble wrapped in linen. He noted the elegance of the presentation and the impossible luxury of cold served by warm hands. And not every act of cooling was shared equally. Sometimes, access to Yakul ice was symbolic, an indicator of your place in the household or the community. One recorded court dispute involved a widow who demanded her late husband's share of Yakul privileges be honored by his brothers. Another tale tells of a wedding dowry that included seasonal rights to a portion of stored snow, a kind of frosty prenup. You walk on, quietly, past a shaded porch where a grandmother is showing her granddaughter how to fold a cloth into a triangle, soak it in cold water, and tie it at the nape of the neck. For the afternoon headaches, she says. And also, because it feels like the mountain wind. You pause under a fig tree and take a seat on a low step, hands clasped loosely in your lap. The heat is manageable now, softened by the hour, by the air, by the rituals that turned endurance into art. And you think, perhaps the real victory wasn't in conquering the sun, but in learning to greet it with grace, linen, and a slow-turning fan. You're walking again, but this time it's not toward the courtyard or the comfort of a cool drink, it's toward the edge of town, where the cypress trees grow thinner, the streets slope downward, and the architecture becomes quiet, heavy, And still, you're entering a different kind of space now, not one for feasts or siestas, but for partings. This is where ice served not the living, but the departing. A realm where snow was not a luxury, but a silent companion in death. You pass through the gates of a burial complex, where a small domed structure squats beside an older yak hole. It's not decorative, it's functional. And inside that dome, the temperature drops enough to make you pause. There's no one here now, save a groundskeeper folding linens in the shade. But centuries ago, this Rumpus chill would have been part of the Persian rites of saying goodbye. Persian burial customs varied from region to region, era to era. Zoroastrians, especially, had strict protocols about bodily purity. Some sects avoided burial entirely, favoring exposure on towers. But for those who entombed their dead Muslims, later dynasties, regional groups became an invisible mourner. In hotter months, the body needed to be kept cool long enough for ritual washing, prayer, and procession. Not all towns had the means to do this with speed or dignity, so families with access to a yakler to purchase blocks of snow from the mountains used ice to preserve the stillness of the deceased just a little longer. A few hand-chiseled blocks beneath a burial shroud, a jug of melted snow for purification, a cloth cooled before being placed over closed eyelids. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was it a privilege of the wealthy, or a quiet kindness available even in poorer communities with ties to caravan routes. Some believe local councils maintained an ice for mourning quota, drawing from communal stores. Others think the service was offered privately, quietly, by families who had the means and shared what they could. One account tells of a child's funeral in a desert town where snow had not reached in weeks. The father sent two messengers overnight on horseback to find a trader, who might still have a jar of ice from the last caravan. The riders returned near dawn, bearing only a palm-sized fragment. It was placed beneath the child's pillow, so that, said the mother, his dreams would be of mountains. You walk slowly through the burial garden. The stones are worn, their script softened by sun and sand. In one corner is a small stone trough, half filled with water, shaded by a simple wooden canopy. That water was once snowmelt collected from ice blocks in jars, poured slowly into the basin so visitors could wash hands, faces, perhaps even feet, before prayer. The idea was not just hygiene, but spiritual clarity, a return to coolness before communion. You step toward a niche in the yakul wall where jars were once stored. One label, still faintly legible, reads, Bari Estefe Daryin for use in ceremony. A scholar who once studied the site wrote that the jars were layered with straw and lined with lime, sealing in coolness even days after delivery. Some, he said, were never even opened, left as offerings to the silence. In the far corner, beneath a patch of thorny pomegranate bushes, you notice a stone bench. You sit for a moment, hands resting on your knees, and try to picture it, a procession moving slowly through heat, the rhythmic murmur of prayer. And perhaps a child carrying a small tray with a bowl of ice water and petals. Not to drink, just to bless, to cool the forehead, to let a breeze lift the scent of rose and snow into the space between this world and the next. Outside the complex, you hear the wind rise. It rustles through the trees and along the wall of the yakul like a whispered hymn. The kind of sound you don't so much hear as feel against the skin of memory. And as you stand, brushing sand from your robe, you understand that even in parting, the cold held meaning. In a land where heat ruled every moment, offering coolness in death was not just practical, it was poetic. A final act of tenderness. You step back through the gate, letting it swing slowly shut behind you. And you think, perhaps the ice was never about escape, heat was about presence. Stillness. The deep breath before farewell. As you leave the cemetery behind, Your mind begins to wander not just through rituals or architecture, but deeper into the very philosophy of heat and cold, and how the Persians once understood their bodies within the rhythm of the seasons. Because in this world, ice wasn't just refreshing, it was medicine, a temperament corrector, a precise tool in the age-old balance of the bodies for humors. You find yourself inside a small apothecary's shop, low-ceilinged and shadowy, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and crushed fruit. Rows of ceramic jars line the shelves, each hand-labeled with ink that's been faded by time, but not forgotten. The shopkeeper, a thin man in a linen robe, nods at you, gestures toward the bench by the wall, and begins preparing something in a mortar. Crushed cucumber, mint, a splash of vinegar, and most importantly a few slivers of ice taken from a clay pot half buried in the ground. You watch him stir, the mixture steaming faintly in the heat despite the cold it contains. He hands it to you in a small, chipped bowl. "Cool the liver," he says with a smile. "Let the heart stop shouting." That's how Persians once saw it through the lens of Galenic medicine, adapted and localized. The human body was made up of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each had a corresponding quality: hot, cold, wet, or dry. And every illness, every imbalance, was a shift in those qualities. Too hot, add cold. Too dry, add wet. And so, ice and snow became a balancing agent, not just to lower body temperature, but to correct the internal energy of a person. A man with anxiety might be offered iced rose water to calm his overheated temperament. A woman with a lingering fever could be wrapped in damp cloths chilled in snow. In some homes, they even placed tiny blocks of ice between the toes or under the arms, believing these were doorways through which excess heat could exit. One 13th century medical text describes the proper use of snow slush compresses to treat insomnia. First the soles of the feet, then the palms, then the forehead spot chosen for its ability to draw heat from the blood without disturbing the digestion. Sleep will follow, the author wrote, like a guest invited softly. Historians still argue whether these treatments were widespread or mostly confined to urban centers, with better access to yak holes and trained herbalists. But anecdotal records abound. In one case, a royal physician traveling through the deserts of Khorasan insisted on carrying a sealed clay jar of ice chips across the entire journey, not for drinking, but for measuring. He would place a chip on a patient's chest and time how long it took to melt. Faster melt, higher internal fever. You step into a side room where a wide marble basin is half filled with water. This was once used for contrast bathing, alternating between warm and cold to stimulate circulation. The cold water was cooled not with snow, but with quince-scented ice, prepared in advance and dropped in just before the patient entered. Let the body remember winter. One inscription reads, "In more spiritual homes, the act of cooling the body was also symbolic. Cold was associated with clarity, humility, and reflection. Heat was linked to passion, impulse, and noise. Thus, in some Sufi orders, novices were offered chilled sherbet before meditation to quench the fire of the world." You return to the shopkeeper, who now offers you a small wafer dusted with ground clove and cardamom, its edge dipped in a glaze that once would have been frozen on a snow-cold plate. You let it rest on your tongue. It's bitter, sweet, cold, exactly what it's supposed to be. In the far corner of the room is a Nikia kind of shrine. Perhaps stow the tools of the trade, an old ladle, a fragment of a cracked ice jar, a fan made from fig leaves stitched with silk thread. On the wall above it, someone has carved an old proverb, "The fire within needs its mirror." You let that sit with you for a moment. As you step out into the light again, the heat presses against your skin. But something inside feels balanced now, aligned. You realize that for the Persians, cold was never the enemy. It was the companion to fire, the tether to clarity, the moment that allowed the body and the soul to exhale. And so you walk a little slower, the warmth no longer a burden but a counterpoint. Thinking, when healing comes chilled, it teaches you to listen. As the day tilts toward late afternoon, you make your way down a narrow alley known more for its gossip than its architecture. The sun strikes the tops of the buildings like cymbals loud, hard, dazzling, but down here, in the slit of shadow between mud brick walls, you hear whispers. A woman leaning out of a window mutters something to a neighbor. A man with a basket of dates lowers his voice as you pass. There's tension in the air, something small, silly maybe, but sticky. That's when you hear it clearly. They stole our ice. You pause. Wait. And there it is again as heists. In the middle of the desert. And not just once. You follow the murmurs to a cluster of homes near a public yak hole, where a few angry voices are exchanging barbs over missing snow. Apparently, last night someone crept in after curfew, after the guards had wandered off and chipped away 3 blocks meant for a wedding the next day. The bride's mother is furious. The yak hole overseer blames poor scheduling. The neighbors all blame that one boy with the quick feet and cousin in the mountains. And you're just fascinated. Because this wasn't uncommon. In the Safavid era especially, as the demand for summer snow grew, so did the drama. You sit on a low bench as someone brings you a small clay cup of rosewater, shaking their head. They think ice comes from the sky like magic, the old man next to you says. They don't see the men who bleed for it. He tells you of a summer decades ago when entire ice caravans were ambushed at night. Not for valuables or livestock but for the ice itself. Historians confirm this. There are court records, actual litigation, that detail ice theft and storage disputes. One merchant in Kaysvin claimed his competitor hired boys to melt his delivered snow with hot coals, so that he'd miss his delivery deadline. Another woman sued her in-laws for melting her dowry ice before the wedding. And in cities where yak holes were communal property, fights over ice rations grew legendary. Over the years, towns devised rules, tokens were issued, families were assigned time slots. Certain events, funerals, weddings, festivals received priority. But still, ice envy simmered. One 18th century judge wrote in his diary that few cases have disturbed the peace more reliably than those involving illicit snow. He described a woman sneaking into a neighbor's share and replacing the missing chunk with a frozen lump of river mud. It was not discovered until after the pudding had been served. He noted dryly. In some places, guards were hired to sleep beside the yak hole. Not inside, they'd melt the goods but on the surrounding walls, wrapped in wet linen, with fans nearby to keep them alert and icy. They were paid in coiner, if the family was poor, with a cup of sharbet and the right to scrape leftover frost after distribution. You listen as the arguments continue. One man insists that his family's block was taken, pointing to the wheel marks in the dust. Another shrugs, clearly unconvinced. You can't help but wonder, was it theft? Was it mismanagement? Or did the son simply get too clever yesterday? Regardless, it reminds you that cold wasn't neutral. It had value, power, symbolism, and yes, the potential for scandal. Just like spices, silk, or oil, snow had a price. And where there's value, there are opportunists. A few enterprising souls even tried to forge iceling poorly packed slush with flecks of white clay to mimic mountain snow. That trick rarely worked. Of course, anyone who's tasted true ice from the Zagros range could spot a fake in a heartbeat. And yet the hustle endured. You wander round to the back of the yak hole and find a scraped corner, clearly worn by repeated secret use. It's a known weak spot, just high enough to go unnoticed, just low enough for someone agile to reach. A bit of damp straw nearby confirms what the whispers have suggested. Someone got in. Took their share. Or more than their share. You smile not because you condone the theft, but because where there's ice, there's intrigue. As you make your way down the path again, you pass another alley where a group of children are playing. One clutches a shallow bowl filled with something suspiciously frosty. You raise an eyebrow. The child grins and runs. And you think, in a world where heat ruled every moment, even a few stolen slivers of snow could feel like a revolution. You walk on through the cooling evening, the air now soft enough to feel like silk brushing against your skin. The sun is mostly gone, just a band of molten light hugging the horizon. It's quiet, reflective, and something about it feels like an ending. Which brings us now not to a yak hole, not to a bowl of falade, but to a question as inescapable as the summer itself. What happened to it all? Because the truth is, most of those domes you visited thrice, the ceremonies, the straw-packed jars and fan-waving children, they're largely gone, or preserved only in pieces. And so now we must ask, how did the Persian icehouse era melt away? You sit on a low stone wall near the edge of town, watching the lights flicker on one by one in distant homes. A few generations ago, those lights didn't exist. Neither did fans. Neither did humming boxes in the kitchen that churned out frost on demand. Historians point to a few major causes. First, and perhaps most obvious, modern refrigeration. With the arrival of British and Russian influence in the late 19th century, came new machine-size making factories, electric coolers, and imported refrigeration units. Cities like Tehran and Isfahan began to modernize, slowly but steadily, and cold became a commodity. You didn't have to chase up a mountain or ration among neighbors. People stopped planning their summers around ice caravans. The mystery disappeared. The miracle was now mechanical. But it wasn't just technology. Colonial trade policy shifted power dynamics. With new priorities and imported infrastructure came a devaluation of local systems. Yak holes were viewed as outdated, unsanitary, or inefficient compared to European models. Funding that once supported communal snow storage was redirected to urban development. Domes were abandoned. Some were bulldozed. Then came urban expansion. Growing populations pushed cities outward. Mud brick neighborhoods gave way to cement blocks and asphalt roads. Courtyards shrank. Wind catchers were clipped or replaced with ceiling fans. Entire Kennet networks were buried under shopping malls and train stations. Even where people wanted to keep using the old ways, the systems around them were vanishing. And finally, there was climate change at how they didn't call it that then. Snow patterns shifted. Some mountain sources became unreliable. A few centuries earlier, a family might plan its ice delivery around predictable snowfalls. But by the mid-20th century, they couldn't be sure. Some villages reported that their snow harvests came too late or not at all. Without the raw material, even the best yak hole was just a hollow shell. And yet, despite all this, some domes remain. You sip from a metal cup someone offers you iced water, perhaps made with an electric fridge, but still served with a sprig of mint. Nearby, a teenager sits beneath a wind tower, tapping on her phone. She's not thinking about insulation ratios or ancient clay recipes, but she's sitting in a space her ancestors once cooled with snow and silence. That's the quiet twist in this story. Some things haven't truly disappeared. They've just shifted form. In recent years, architects across Iran and the world have begun to revisit yak holes. Passive cooling has returned to the conversation not as nostalgia, but as innovation. Climate-conscious designers are now asking, how did they do so much with so little? You think of the Badgers, now mimicked in luxury eco-resorts. The domed insulation of yak holes, inspiring thermal mass cooling in modern architecture. Even the idea of community-shared cold storage being reimagined in urban gardens and neighborhood sustainability projects. You look up at the stars, which have arrived without fanfare, and you realize the age of icehouses didn't end. It melted into something else, a slow diffusion of knowledge, practice, memory. The domes may crumble, the camel bells may fade, but the logic, the wisdom behind it all, still lingers in the walls, in the wells, in the wind. And maybe that's the nature of coolness. You don't hold onto it. You invite it. Let it pass through. Let it do its work. Then you let it go. Like a breeze. Like a story. You're moving through the outskirts of the modern town now, where construction cranes loom like slow insects over rooftops, and motorcycles hum like restless bees in the distance. Yet here, tucked between a concrete school building and a paved roundabout, stands something familiar, a shape from another time, a yak hole restored. At first glance, it looks new, clean, a little too clean, maybe. Its dome is perfectly patched, the plaster glistens faintly, and a small sign explains its purpose in both Farsi and English: traditional icehouse, passive cooling system, 17th century design. You step closer. The air around it is cooler than expected, just as before. And then you smile, because it's not a ruin anymore, it's a blueprint. Today's architects, climate scientists, and sustainability engineers are looking backward to move forward. The yak hull, once dismissed as antiquated desert folklore, is now being studied with reverence and precision. In a world overheating with each passing summer, the idea of cooling without electricity suddenly feels less nostalgic and more necessary. You walk slowly around the dome, tracing the gentle curve of its walls. A small pipe near the base has been fitted with the sensor part of a university project. Maybe testing how effectively internal temperatures can be controlled using nothing but material thickness, orientation, and ventilation. Inside, you hear soft footsteps echoing against the dome. A group of architecture students are speaking in quiet tones, sketching angles, measuring light flow. One of them holds a thermal imaging camera, watching the color spectrum shift as the air moves through a narrow vent. This isn't a museum piece. It's a lab, a workshop for learning how old wisdom speaks to modern crisis. One researcher is explaining how modern building materials often trap heat instead of managing it. These people understood how heat behaves, she says. They didn't fight it, they partnered with it. They guided it away like a river. You sit in the corner, in a patch of shadow that feels timeless, and listen. There are international conferences now where Persian yak hulls are sited, alongside Greek wind catchers and Indian stepwells. One urban planner in Morocco has designed ice-storing domes for refugee camps, using 90% local materials and 0% electricity. Another in Arizona has built a residential cooling system, modeled directly on Yazd's wind tower network. Some Iranian villages, too, have started reclaiming their old domes. A few have been repurposed as root cellars, others as storage for medicinal herbs, and at least one as a children's reading nook. Quiet, softly lit. A place for thought in the midst of chaos. And it's not just the structures. The culture of cooling is being rediscovered. Workshops now teach traditional Sruj plaster recipes, incorporating clay, ash, and goat hair. Schools offer summer electives on passive architecture. You lean back against the wall. It's cool. Just cool enough. And you realize this isn't the past. This is continuity. Historians sometimes divide things to cleanly ancient versus modern, tradition versus innovation. But here, sitting inside a structure that held ice before Newton defined gravity, and still holds cool air today without a single wire, you understand something quieter, simpler, Some ideas don't expire. They just wait. And when the world is ready again, when the heat gets loud enough, the city's thick enough, the grid's unstable enough, these ideas return. Not with fanfare, but with shape, silence, and shadow. You watch as the students pack up their notes and leave. The light dims. The air stays still. And you think the Persians weren't building for nostalgia. They were building for function. They just happened to build so well that, centuries later, when the power flickers and the fans stop spinning, their walls still know what to do. The sky is deep indigo now, and the stars begin to blink on one by one, like old lanterns someone forgot to put out. You step outside the restored yakel and walk away slowly, your sandals stirring up puffs of dust that catch the moonlight like smoke. There's no more agenda, no more route. Just you, the desert wind, and a lingering sense of quiet admiration. You drift toward the edge of the village, where the land falls away into an open plain, flat and wide as the sea. In the distance, dark hills rise like sleeping giants. It's cooler now, not just because of the hour, but because your mind has slowed. The warmth no longer presses. It glows. You find a spot among the sparse grass, a low knoll that gives you a wide view of the domes and towers behind Yautho's soft, rounded silhouettes that have now taken on a gentler shade of silver. One by one, the homes in the village dim their lights. A final rooftop curtain is drawn. Somewhere, a wooden door creaks closed. The night has officially arrived. And so you settle. On your back now, staring upward, arms folded behind your head. The earth still holds the faintest warmth, like a kettle cooling after a long day. You breathe in, then out, and you remember everything you've seen. The ice that made its way across deserts and deadlines. The towers that sang with wind. The women who fanned themselves with grace, and the children who slept beneath the stars on mud brick roofs. The stolen snow, the ceremonial slush, the cooling touch placed gently on a fevered brow. The cities that designed themselves around shadow, not vanity. You begin to realize that Persian cooling was never just about physics, it was about ethics. A way of life that listened more than it pushed, that worked with nature instead of against it, that shaped space so humans could breathe, rest, and sleep without conquest, without noise. Even now, with all our buttons and buzzers, our air conditioners and apps, there's something deep within you that responds to this simplicity, that loves the idea of a dome that stays cool without humming, a vice that travels 60 kilometers just to attend a wedding, of a grandmother showing her granddaughter how to dip linen into snow and say, "Here, this will help you dream." You roll onto your side, the breeze pressing gently against your cheek. It carries with it the scent of dust, mint, and old earth, and maybe a bit of mountain memory. And so here you are. The journey is over. The sun has set. The camels are asleep. The wind towers exhale in silence, and the Isomware, deep in the demise, still waiting. Waiting for the next summer. Waiting for the next story. Waiting for someone, perhaps like you, to lean into its coolness and remember what we once knew. To trust in clay. To shape shadow. To store winter. Even in fire. Let your body settle now. Loosen the shoulders. Unclench your jaw. You've walked far tonight across domes and deserts, through markets and mountain passes. You've followed the sound of camel bells and the hush of snow settling in straw. And now it's time to let all of that fade gently, like steam on a cold bowl of sharbat. Breathe in softly and release it even slower. No need to control anything. The air around you knows what to do. It's been cooling homes long before you were born, wrapping sleepers in quiet like a second skin. Let your thoughts become simple now images instead of sentences. A hand brushing condensation from a brass cup. A dome glowing in moonlight. A courtyard filled with soft shadows and slower footsteps. The sound of water dripping in a deep, still well. You are there. You are here. The wind towers above you sigh gently, their long exhale reaching you from another age. There's no urgency now. No heat to escape. Just the slow turning of time and the memory of a people who made peace with the sun. Let your breath fall into rhythm with theirs. Let the story melt into silence. Let your body cool like clay. Sleep, traveler. Sleep in the dome.